Well, good morning and welcome to a Learn to Fish video. You find me this morning sitting behind my tench rods trying to catch a few nice big springtime tench. And whilst I'm here today, I'm going to give you a step-by-step guide that will hopefully help you catch some more tench this spring. And as you can see, the wind is blowing in here really strong. It's a strong southerly wind that brings me on nicely to the first step, and that's location. So last night, before I headed over to the lakes, I looked at the weather forecast, saw we had southerly winds that are going to go slight southwesterly a bit later today, and I had a rough idea on this big pit where I thought the tench would turn up, because they will follow these winds, especially in the spring. So I've got in a swim that I'm happy with, the wind's blowing in here, and I've got to find a spot that I want to fish. So the marker rod has come out, I've had a few casts round. It's normally quite weedy up this end of the lake, but it's still quite early. We're in April, the weed isn't that high yet, but I found a really clean area of gravel with a little bit of siltweed around it on the end of this wind, which hopefully, I'm predicting with a bit of bait on that gravel and the combination of this wind blowing up here nicely, them tench will turn up at some point today. So the rods are out, they've been out there about 20 minutes. I'm gonna have a recast in a moment. And when I recast the rods, we can talk about the second step, which is my rigs that I use for tench fishing. Well, it's time for a recast. I find it super important, especially at the beginning of the session, to recast the feeders quite regularly and use the feeders to build the swim and keep applying more bait to the swim. And the feeders that I use for 90% of my tench fishing are these inline bolt feeders from Drennan, and they're really easy to use. As the name would suggest, the line threads straight through the feeder, and I've got a little quick chain swivel that just plugs in the back of the feeder. That is super safe. If I pull it under pressure, the swivel will pull out the back of the feeder. And then attached to that quick chain swivel, I've got a 4-inch 10-pound fluorocarbon hook link down to a size 10 hook, where I've knotless knotted it with a quick stop on the end of the hair. And then with my quick stop needle, I push maybe 4 to 5 sections of dendrobina worm on the back of that rig, and that's what they call a worm kebab rig, and that can be absolutely deadly for tench. And if I just swap to the other rod, it's exactly the same rig, the same feeder, but on this one I've got maggots as a hook bait. So again, 10-pound fluorocarbon hook link, 4 inches long. I've got one plastic maggot that I thread over the hook, almost like a kicker that a carp angler would use, and then I hook maybe 4 or 5 red maggots straight on a size 12 hook. And then before I actually cast these out, the hardware itself, these are the new Advanta, these are the Barbel rods, a 1.75 pound test curve. They cover so much in my fishing, obviously from barbel fishing, tench fishing, bream fishing. I've even used them for stalking carp in the edge. And on there, I've got some 6,000 size Shimano Baitrunners loaded up with some 10-pound line. And if you want to know exactly all the tackle that I'm using today, all the terminal tackle and the hardware, I will put a link in the description with a list of everything that I'm using. But I'm quite keen to cast these back out. I'm praying them tench do turn up on this wind, but I aren't going to catch any whilst the feeder's in my hand. going to have a move of swims. Well, to be precise, I'm going to have a move of lakes. It might seem like I'm being slightly impatient, but it's cold on the end of this wind this morning. I haven't had any line bites, I haven't seen any tench rolling, and I feel I should have caught one by now. So I'm going to reel these rods in, I'm going to jump in the van, go to the other end of the complex, get on that other lake, and when I get there I can talk you through finding those spots that I'm fishing and how much bait to apply to start the swim going. So I'm going to get these in, we'll get on that other lake, and then we'll talk a little bit about the spots to fish when you're tench fishing. It feels much warmer around here out of that wind, and I have fished this lake a few times for tench, and I know out here somewhere is a nice strip of gravel that I usually get those tench feeding on. So I'm going to have a couple of casts with a marker rod, find where that gravel is, and that'll be the spot that I bait up with. So once I've found that spot, I won't go into too much depth how to find the features now, because we have filmed a separate video how to use a marker rod, how to use a leading rod, and how to find those features. But basically what I'll do, I'll drag this marker float along the bottom until I feel it tapping on that gravel. As soon as I get that tap, 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 there we are, I put the line in the line clip so I know exactly what distance that is. I know that I'm in line with the swim on the opposite bank. I've now got the distance marked on my marker rod, so I can wrap this round the wrap sticks. I can do the same distance on my fishing rods and the same distance on my spod rod. So accuracy is super important. And getting all three of those rods at the same distance over a bed of bait neatly time after time can make a big difference between how many fish you catch. But like I say, if you want a bit more of an in-depth video of how to find those features using a marker rod or a spod rod, I have filmed a separate video, and I'll put a link to that video in the description below. Right, it's time to put some bait in the swim. I've found that nice gravel area. I've got the spod rod all marked out the right distance, and this is probably my go-to tench spod mix. It's nice and simple, and it's a mixture of plenty of hemp seed. Tench absolutely love hemp. And then I've got a mixture of 2mm and 4mm sticky krill pellets. And then I add to that, I wouldn't go anywhere without this last bait, and that is red maggot. So I mix them together. I'll probably put 7-8 spods out there just to jumpstart the swim. And also on top of that, as I mentioned earlier in the video, I'll recast those maggot feeders every 20-30 minutes as well, just to keep trickling bait on the spot. So get the swim initially jump started with the spod rod, and then build on the swim by recasting the feeders. Well, that's the rods all wrapped out around the marker sticks and set at the correct distance, and you can save yourself a little bit of time if you mark the line with some marker elastic. So about 1 foot off the tip ring of the rod, I put a bit of marker elastic on the main line, which means if you do catch a fish, rather than having to go back to the marker sticks and wrap them all out again, you can have a false cast, which basically means you cast the feeder back out until you hear the marker elastic rattle through the rod rings, and then you can just wind it back in until you see the marker elastic 1 foot off the tip ring, put the line back in the line clip, and then just reel it back in, and then fill your feeder up, bait your hook up, and cast it back on the spot. Probably taken about an hour to get a bite. After baiting up with the spod, putting out that mixture of little pellets, hemp and maggots, and the right hand rod has whistled away. So going down to location, I didn't feel confident in that first spot. It just felt far too cold on the end of that wind today. So I've moved around here in the sunshine, found a new spot with a marker float, got the rods back out, and well, we've had a take. So it's well worth the move. I don't think it would have happened this morning in the first spot. And we've got our first tench of the day. Well, it might only be a little baby tench, but it just proves that if you follow all those steps, you won't be long in catching a few tench this spring. And normally once I get the first bite, it's a sign that I've got everything right, and I normally get a few bites. So I'm going to slip this little fella back, get that feeder back out there, and see if we can catch a slightly bigger one. But I'll say goodbye today for the end of this video, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any future videos.